This is the first lecture in Chapter 13, the cardiovascular system. We're going to be looking at the basic anatomy of the heart and some of its primary functions. So the basic anatomy of the heart, the job of the heart is to move blood all throughout the body, and it does that by acting as a pump. It's a very, very forceful pump, so it has the ability to push blood all throughout the body, both up towards the head and down toward the feet and then back again. The heart is divided into two basic circuits, so it's kind of simultaneously doing two different jobs. The first job, or the first circuit that blood circulates through or moves around in, is called the pulmonary circuit. So pulmonary refers to the lungs, and so the pulmonary circuit is just in charge of delivering blood to the lungs. So if this is a heart in a body, the lungs are really right here. They're very, very close. So this is a really short trip for the blood to make. The blood goes to the lungs where it drops off carbon dioxide for the person to breathe out, and it picks up oxygen, or O2, for delivery to the rest of the body. Once this happens, the blood goes right back to the heart, where it then travels on the systemic circuit. The systemic circuit is all of the rest of the body. So the blood at this point has lots of oxygen, and it moves through the heart in order to get pumped to all the tissues of the body. The blood makes it all the way around the body in very little time. So here's where the heart can be found within the body. It's this structure right here. It's kind of hidden under the lungs here, but it lies almost exactly along the middle of the body, which is really interesting. Most people think of the heart as being way over on the left side, and it's really not. It's right along the middle of the body, just slightly to the left of your spinal cord, the center of the sternum or the rib cage. And it is made up of a very thick muscular material, as well as some connective tissue. Around the heart itself, let me change my color here, is a sac called the pericardium. So it would be here in red. Peri means around, and card, anything card refers to the heart. So you've probably heard of a cardiologist. That's a doctor that works strictly with the heart. So the pericardium attaches down here to this thick muscle called the diaphragm, and the diaphragm is sort of an upside down U, and it is responsible for contracting and pulling down like this, which opens up the lungs. Basically it fills them up, and then it relaxes, which flattens it out, and then the lungs can force the air back out of your body. So the pericardium attaches to that diaphragm at the bottom. It also attaches to your spinal column at the back, which you can't really see in this picture, and it is filled with blood vessels and a small bit of fluid, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Inside of the pericardium is another thinner membrane that lays right over the heart itself. So when we dissect our heart, you'll see there's this thin, so this is called the epicardium, a really thin layer, sort of like the dura on the brain. It's very thin and protective, and it surrounds the heart muscle itself. So the space in between the two, you can see here, there's a little bit of space between the epicardium and the pericardium. That's called the pericardial cavity. Remember, cavity means an opening or a space. And there's some fluid in there that allows for, when the heart beats, it allows for some kind of lubrication of the pericardium and epicardium, so that when the heart beats, those two membranes aren't rubbing against one another and causing friction, which would damage the heart and be fairly painful as well. And so it helps to provide some protection from that. The walls of the heart are really, really thick. And again, you're going to see this when we dissect here pretty soon, in just a couple of weeks. But again, now if we are starting by talking about the epicardium. That was the thin, thin, thin membrane around the outside of the heart. Again, it's very thin, it's connective. There's a little bit of adipose tissue. You won't really see this in our hearts because the epicardium has been removed, but in an actual heart, and you can kind of see it in this picture down here, it's this yellow material, there is some adipose tissue, a little bit of fat for protection of the heart. Just inside of that is the heart muscle itself. So you might remember from the muscle chapter, myo means muscle. So myocardium is heart muscle. And it is very thick, very dense. It has a huge blood supply, which is why it is very, very, very dark red, almost even brown, because there's so much blood there. It has a good nerve supply, so that the heartbeat can be regulated without you having to tell it to beat. And there are some lymph vessels which are responsible for draining extra fluid and looking out for germs and other dangerous substances. Inside of the heart is a layer called endocardium. Endo means inside of, and card still means heart. So inside of the heart, there's a layer made of epithelial and connective tissue, again, some more blood vessels, and a special group of fibers named for the gentleman. I'm assuming he's a gentleman, I don't know that for sure, made for the person who discovered them. And those are called Purkinje fibers. We'll talk about them again when we get to the mechanism of heartbeat. So if we look at the heart in half, let's say we took the heart and we cut it right down the middle, so we had a front and a back half. Here's what you would see. This would be the back half, or the posterior half of the heart. All mammal hearts have 4 chambers, and you can see them here. Let me get a narrower pointer for a second. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 and 2 are the atria. Atria is plural, singular is atrium, and it means room in Latin. So the upper 2 rooms of the heart are for collecting purposes. They collect the blood when it returns from the lungs or from the body. They're very thin-walled. They basically are just a hollow chamber. The lower 2 chambers, 3 and 4 in this picture, are the ventricles, and we just call them the left ventricle and the right ventricle, which is nice and easy. Their job is to pump the blood. So they have much, much, much thicker walls, which again you can see here in this picture. Look at how thick the wall is on this left ventricle, excuse me, versus the wall on the left atria. You can hardly see the wall on the atria, but the wall of the ventricle is very fat. The reason for that is this is where the pumping happens. So there is a huge amount of force being exerted by this structure, and as a result, it needs to have a very thick muscle. The center of the heart is divided. It's a dividing line called the septum, which means the wall. Anywhere in your body that there are little walls to divide 2 sides, it's pretty much called the septum. And the purpose of this is to keep the blood on the right side of the the right side of the heart, separate from the blood on the left side of the heart. And in just a minute, we'll talk about why that's important. So there is some more separation. There's not just the septum involved with separating the heart. There is also some separation between the atria and the ventricles, so that the blood, when it's being collected by the atria, it doesn't just ooze into the ventricles. That would be a problem. That's in fact called a heart murmur, when there's no separation or the separation isn't working well. If you look at this diagram, this is a really cool one. We've cut the heart in half again, but this time they cut it into superior and inferior half. So here's the superior, or the top half of the heart. Here's the inferior or bottom half. So if we lift the top half off and then look at the bottom half, here's what you would see. So here is the right side of the heart, and here is the left side of the heart. And you can see that there's not just open space leading from the atria into the ventricles. On the right side of the heart, right here, there is this little structure called the tricuspid valve. The tricuspid valve has that name because it has three little flaps or cusps. You can see them here, 1, 2, 3. And its job, it acts like a doorway for allowing the blood to move from the atria into the ventricles. But when the blood is in the atria, it's that doorway, that valve is closed. And then when it's time for the blood to move into the ventricles, those flaps open up. Basically, they open downward so that the blood can push in. And when there's no more blood, then the flaps close behind the blood. There's a similar structure on the left side of the heart, although it only has two valves, or pardon me, two flaps within the one valve. So it is called, depending on the textbook, sometimes it's called the bicuspid, two flaps. I think our book mostly uses the term mitral valve, and so you can use either one, they're interchangeable. And it has the same job. The blood pushes through, and then the little flaps close shut behind the blood to keep it within the ventricles at that point. There are similar structures within the ventricles. So the ventricles eventually lead to big blood vessels, and it's important that once the blood goes into the blood vessels, it stays in the vessels. It doesn't go backwards into the heart. And so there are little valves you can see here. Here are two big blood vessels, one leaving the right side of the heart and one leaving the left. Actually, now you can't really see because I just kind of wrote over them. Let me erase these. You can see there are two more valves here. One of them is leading into the body blood vessels and one is leading into the lung blood vessels. But again, same job. They keep the blood from falling back into the heart once it's been pumped out. So on the right side of the body, we have the pulmonary valve, so the valve leading to the lungs. And on the left side of the body, we have what's called the aortic valve, because the blood vessel that takes blood to the body is called the aorta. It is a huge blood vessel. You will be stunned when you see how big it is. Okay, so this is a huge mess, and we're just going to move it, and I'll just tell you what's happening. So, the movement of blood in the heart. This is how does blood move. Charming writing, right? Okay. This is how blood travels through the heart. So first we have, let's say blood is coming in. Here's our heart again. Blood is coming in to the right side of the heart. And I know this looks backwards, right? The right side, as you're looking at it, appears to be on the left. That's because we are referring to the right side of the heart inside the person that owns the heart. So as you are sitting right now, the right side of your heart, right, is on, in this picture, looks like it's on the left side of our viewing angle. But that's just something you have to kind of get used to flipping your mind about. So the right side of the heart is collecting blood that is coming back from the body. So let's say that this blood is coming from maybe the arms and the legs, and there's a huge blood vessel that comes up the back side of the heart and then into the right atria. And this blood vessel is called the vena cava. And it is a gigantic blood vessel where all the other blood from the body pours into this one, and then it is returned to the right side of the heart. So here we are in the right atria, and all of this blood that has just come back is very low in oxygen because the oxygen has been delivered to the tissues of the body and carbon dioxide has been picked up. So at this point, this blood is basically useless to your body. It has a whole bunch of carbon dioxide, a whole bunch of waste. It's very low in oxygen. So it comes into the heart where it collects in the right atria. When the right atria is full, then the tricuspid valve opens up and this blood pours into the right ventricle.